Good morning, and welcome to the Desert Southwest Conference Laity session. I am Alberta Farnsworth, and I am your conference lay leader. Those of you who were here last year may remember that we had not chosen a lay leader prior to our annual meeting. The Clergy and Lay Leadership Committee was tasked with finding someone or to find co-lay leaders to fill the position. Gail Gorey and I were chosen to co-fill the position, and we worked well together for a few months until Gail made the decision to move out of our conference area, and we sadly bid her goodbye. The Clergy and Lay Leadership Committee and I discerned together and decided I would continue as the sole lay leader. I thank them for their vote of confidence. I come before you this morning via a recording because, in addition to being the lay leader, I'm also a grandma, and my granddaughter's high school scheduled her graduation at the exact same time as this meeting. I am in Maryland attending the graduation of Southern High School in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. Bishop Grant Hagaya has a word of welcome for us this morning.
Greetings. This is Bishop Grant Hagaya, and I want to extend my joyous greetings to all of you laity at our Desert Southwest laity session. I'm so sorry that I cannot be on live with you, but I'm having to preside over the clergy session at exactly the same time. What I do want to share with you today is my deepest thank you for your dedication and hard work during the last 2.5 years of our pandemic shutdown. You have given your all to keep your church and our annual conference alive and well during impossible challenges. Far from giving up or giving in, you have faithfully carried on the ministry of Jesus Christ. And because of that, we have not just survived. Many of us have thrived. Thank you. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I am grateful to God for each and every one of you. I look forward to seeing you all in person on Friday. May we continue to be the hope.
Thank you, Bishop. We, the laity, make up most of who our conference is and the reason our conference exists. We walk with our clergy in the goal of being a courageous church, loving like Jesus, acting for justice, and united in hope. As the laity of the church, we are the example of Christianity, seen by the public both in our church and our community. The words from the song, "I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together," should be our theme. The church is not a building, it's a people, and the mission field is where we go when we leave the building. The miracle of Zoom and other virtual mediums has extended our outreach beyond our local communities, and it has been a blessing to embrace it in most of our settings. It has been the laity who have had to step up and learn to use the medium to assure that we have the capacity of adding virtual meetings into the fabric of our religious experience. I say thank you, especially to those of you who had to really stretch yourselves to accept this new additional way of doing church. Our clergy and lay leadership team provides us, both clergy and laity, with an opportunity each month, except for the summer months, to educate ourselves with the talk about leadership. This year, we have had the opportunity to learn about several books and authors who wrote to encourage those of us who have stepped up in leadership positions or who are interested in doing so. I would like to welcome Judy Martin, Chair of the Clergy and Lay Leadership Committee, to say a few words.
Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here. This morning, I just want to take a few minutes to invite you to leadership. We have a slide that's not up, but it will come up. I just want to encourage anyone, and can I say that 3 times? Anyone. We need anyone to come and serve on our leadership committees. You can submit your application via the Desert Southwest Conference website, and that's what's playing right now, or is going to play real quick. You go to dscumc.org, look under connections at the top, go to committees and click. When you click that, you see the leadership invitation. You click that, the invitation comes up and you fill out the application, we get it, and then you can be sure that you will get a response from our team. You also see that there's a nominate someone. So if you think somebody would be great serving for a conference committee, you click on the nominate someone and you'll fill out the information about yourself and the individual. And then it will as well come to us and we will review it and be in contact. So please, please, please submit names so that we can fill positions. And remember, anyone, I think I've made that clear, I hope, anyone can serve. So please contact us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Judy. An additional source of education for the laity of our conference is Lay Servant Ministries. Susan Bowers leads the committee and will tell us about the work of her committee.
Hi, my name is Susan Bowers, and I'm the Conference Director of Lay Servant Ministries. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I want to make sure you know about one of the best lay leadership development programs of the United Methodist Church. I would bet, because you are all here at annual conference, that you see your calling as a Christian to be of service to the church and the wider world. As Christ served us, we are called to serve others. The Lay Servant Ministries program addresses specific training to witness to Christian faith through the areas of spoken communications, leadership within the church and wider community, and to provide caring ministry. The Lay Servant Ministries program offers both an Introduction to Lay Servant Ministries course and advanced courses. The advanced courses focus on communications, leadership, and caring, and cover areas as broad as leading worship, discovering your spiritual gifts, lay pastoral caregiving, conflict resolution, and the polity of the United Methodist Church. There are dozens of courses offered annually across the conference through the individual districts. New courses are being developed to remain current and relevant. Courses are all 10 hours in length and are offered in a variety of formats, such as 2 consecutive weekend dates or 3 weeknights, and others, in either a face-to-face or a Zoom model. Our instructors are both clergy and laity who are passionate about the topics that they are teaching. Being engaged in the Lay Servant Ministry program includes advancing to become a certified lay servant. Some are called to take specific courses that would lead them to be a certified lay speaker. For those with additional calling to ministry, it is possible to become a certified lay minister by working with both the Lay Servant Ministries program and your district committee on ordained ministry. Each district has a district director of Lay Servant Ministry. They include Paul Hewitt of the North District, Phil Tesserick of the East District, Betty Stewart in the West District, and co-directors of our South District, Kelly Deo and Gretchen Lofgren. Courses that are offered in each district are advertised on the conference website. You're welcome to attend classes in any of the districts. I would invite you to look further into how you can expand your personal service to the church and wider world through communications, leadership, and caring through Lay Servant Ministries. If you have further questions, you can email me at layservants@dscumc.org. That's easy to remember. layservants@dscumc.org. I would ask you to consider becoming a lay servant by participating in the next Introduction to Lay Servant Ministries course offered either in your district or elsewhere in the conference. Thank you for your time, and God bless you.
Thank you, Susan. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning. My friend, Deaconess Martha Lundgren, is a United Methodist deaconess who responded to a call to provide faithful care to dying persons. Much of her work involves educating people about end-of-life issues, how to complete advance directive documents, and how to make cremation, burial, funeral, and memorial arrangements that are dignified, meaningful, and affordable. Because she sees funeral poverty as a social justice issue, Deaconess Martha also serves on the board of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Arizona, a consumer advocacy organization that provides objective information about the requirements and options of making after-death arrangements. Please welcome Deaconess Martha.
Thank you, Alberta, for inviting me to speak with you all today. It's really a privilege to be here. My call to be a deaconess came from a series of events my sister describes as having been in the wrong place at the right time on a number of occasions, with people sometimes unexpectedly facing their mortality, other times facing it head on, sometimes resisting with all their might, other times with a peaceful understanding that all would be well. I've seen fear and courage and sorrow and sometimes even joy. And always there was grace. Coming from a large family, I've seen lots of new folks enter the world and more than a few leave their mortal life. They say folks from large families or who grew up on farms like I did find it easier to contemplate mortality. Perhaps those are some of the other reasons I've been really curious about mortality and found myself willing and able to talk about it, to be a source of support, and to make practical plans regarding my own. So as I've reflected on those experiences, I've thought a lot about breath and breathing. Fast forward to where I am today, what I've come to understand down to my core is that each of our breaths, our first breath, our last breath, and all the breaths in between are of God's own spirit, and each breath is sacred. What I'm going to speak about with you today comes from my lived experiences, lots of reading, lots of speaking with others, lots of reflections and workshops. I'm going to speak today from that perspective as a lay person, not as a counselor, a medical person, or some other professional in the business of life and death. And I think that puts me in both a unique position to advocate for contemplating our mortality as something each and every one of us is called to do. I've put my email address in the chat. If you'd like me to share some of the resources that have been helpful to me, please send me an email. You know, it's pretty neat too how our time together ties into the theme of this year's annual conference, Thrive. From Deuteronomy 30:19, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And from John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. No matter what, must we have to thrive? Deep breaths of clean, fresh air. When I hear that someone is going to have a baby, it's really fun to think about the focus and the preparation and all the anticipation that happens over the next several months. When a mother's pregnant, she and her partner, especially the first time around, read everything they can about what's happening to her body during pregnancy, how the baby's developing inside her, what to expect and to do for their infant during its first weeks and months and years. When the time is right for them, they share the news with the people they love and trust the most, and in time, they broaden this circle, sharing their news with more and more people. Parties are planned, gifts are given, advice is shared. So much anticipation, so much fun. It can be a wondrous time. When delivery time is near, the parents pack their hospital go bag. Family and friends await news of the baby's arrival. The mother-to-be has grown large and is experiencing the discomforts of late pregnancy. She's anxious to deliver her child. And then the mother labors. Her labor coach and perhaps some other loved ones are in the room with her. The medical team coaching and supporting and preparing to receive the newborn. Then God breathed breath into Adam's nostrils, the breath of life, and man became a living being. Can you imagine God's own anticipation, both ahead of Adam's first breath and ahead of each of our own? In that labor room, everyone in the room holds their breath, waiting to hear that newborn cry as it takes its first breath, its first deep breath of life. The room erupts in joy. The baby is swaddled and as soon as possible laid on its mother's chest. Mother and child rest in each other's breathing. All those months of preparation, the anticipation, the support of friends and family has led up to this sacred time, this holy moment. I think God must also be excited, filled with joy when a new creation takes its first breath. After all, Genesis 1:27 tells us that so God created humans in God's image. In the image of God, God created them. It seems to me that in moments of our great joy, God must be reflecting that back to us. And frankly, I think that the scriptures understate what God must have felt when God separated light from darkness and the earth brought forth plants and trees bearing every kind of fruit, and the sea and the birds of the air, and formed human from dust and breathed life into Adam's nostrils. The scriptures tell us that when God looked at what God created, God saw that it was good. Good? Just good? I'm not going to quibble with what word for good might have been used or how it's translated, but I'm going to suggest that not only did God see that what God created was good, and that when God finished on the sixth day, that everything was indeed very good, do you not think that God had to just be delighted, ecstatic, over the moon with joy? What God had created wasn't just good. It wasn't just very good. It was breathtaking. And I wonder, have you ever thought about God's creation in that way? According to the Canadian Lung Association, the average person breathes about 15 times a minute, 22,000 times a day, or 154,000 times a week, or 8,030,000 times a year. That comes out to 642 million. 400,000 times for a person by the time they're 80 years old. Holy moly, just think about what that first breath starts. 642,400,000 life-giving, life-sustaining breaths. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. In and out, in and out, in and out. For someone blessed with longevity, 642,400,000 sacred breaths. Remember that Genesis makes a point that God created all the plants of the earth that produce seeds and fruit of all kinds. From the beginning, we learned that seeds would be necessary to grow new crops season after season. Plants die. Plants need to be replenished from their own seeds. Death and new life, it turns out, are anticipated from the beginning of creation before even man. I'm really fascinated about how complicated our bodies are, how interconnected and interdependent each of our parts are, and how entirely dependent we are on all of creation. This great big gorgeous tree you see here is doing its thing, putting on leaves, pulling in carbon dioxide, and pumping out the oxygen we need through photosynthesis. It's a complex system in itself. And by the way, in the desert part of the Desert Southwest Conference, even cacti produce the oxygen that you depend on. Our complicated human system could not function with all its interdependent parts and without its interdependence on other systems. We need each other to thrive. One of my favorite physical sensations is how my lungs feel after I've really put them to work. It's an interesting combination of feeling both tired and energetic. This is my sister's friend, Madeline. Phyllis enjoyed picking Madeline up from her home to run errands, to get an ice cream, or to take her to see a favorite dog. Phyllis loves to tell that Madeline would get just a few steps outside and Madeline would lift her nose to the sky, breathe in deeply, and exhale with all she had. For that moment, anyway, all was right in Madeline's world. The Desert Southwest Conference is filled with breathtaking scenery, from Red Rock Canyon and Valley of Fire in Nevada to the Chiricahuas and the San Francisco Peaks in Arizona, the Grand Canyon and Sedona, the forests of the White Mountains, the lemon yellow of Palo Verde in bloom. I've been fortunate enough to see these magnificent sights. But there was a moment in my own home, surrounded by familiar things, that I experienced something breathtaking in a way I never had before. Shortly after my husband died, I got in touch with my dear friends, Marty and Ann. Ann is creative in all sorts of ways, and Marty is an accomplished woodworker. I asked if they would consider making a wooden box, an urn to hold David's ashes. I had something particular in mind, and they immediately agreed. Ann polished the design, and Marty set to work. A few weeks later, I got a text from Marty telling me that the box was on its way and should be delivered the next day. When the box arrived, I was alone at home. I set aside whatever I'd been doing, and I opened the package. I took it out of the box and removed the protective wrapping. Seeing the finished box for the first time literally took my breath away. For a moment, I was so moved by how beautiful it was. The image engraved on it was perfect. The box itself was exquisitely simple and so perfect to me that my lungs felt like they stopped moving. There was no air in my lungs, and for several moments, I had no impulse to inhale. I sent a text to Marty and Ann telling them that the box had arrived and that I would call them when I could breathe again. I sat with it for several minutes. My breathing became normal and gentle. I could speak again. I called to thank them and to share that when I looked at the box and I saw all the creativity, the craftsmanship, and the love they put into this precious box, I was so moved that I just couldn't breathe. A few days ago, I was thinking about breathtaking moments, and I thought back to the creation story in Genesis and of God breathing life into Adam. I got to thinking about how excited God must have been about all God had created. After all, we're created in God's image, right? And if we're created in God's image, perhaps our own excitement about the things we create, a piece of furniture, a handmade baby blanket, mastering a difficult piece of music, baking the perfect cinnamon rolls, or finishing a major project at work, we feel compelled to share our pleasure and our excitement about what we've done. We may be so excited and delighted that we don't just feel good about it, we feel great. So I wonder, when God looked at all God had made in the Genesis story, and more than a few times after. If those weren't also breathtaking moments for God, I wonder if when God breathed life into Adam, perhaps it was Adam actually taking God's breath away. So we're going to go into a breakout session now, and I want you to think of a breathtaking moment when you saw something in nature, perhaps you received something or experienced something that even that you made that took your own breath away. Did you think of that as a sacred moment at the time? As you reflect on that now, in what way does that memory feel sacred to you? Please make sure that everybody in your group who wants to share gets the chance. You should have about 2 minutes a person, and I'm going to ask Christina to move you into your breakout rooms. Well, welcome back, everybody. I was reflecting while you were away and having your conversations about how God must also be delighted to know we have conversations like these. So welcome back. Let's continue. So I want to talk a little bit about when we're under stress. You know, sometimes not all is as well with the world as it was in that picture with Madeline and her poodle friend. Like when we're stressed or upset or angry. How does our breath serve us during those times? Most of us are familiar with the flight or fight response that we might have to a stressful event. When we're facing something we perceive as dangerous or something that makes us angry, we react. We stop thinking and we just react. The limbic system in our brain takes over and our thinking brain shuts down so that all our energy is focused on our body's response. Because when you come face to face with the bear, as the old joke goes, the way to survive the bear is not to calculate how many seconds it will take the bear to close the distance between it and you. It's to outrun your friend. If your thinking brain is in charge and tries to do the math, by the time you finish the calculation, it just might be too late. All jokes aside, there are times when fight or flight kicks in unhelpful ways. When what we really need to do is engage our head or our heart or both and not let our body or our mouth take over. What are we to do, though, when the limbic system, a part of the brain most of us didn't even know exists, automatically kicks in? We're on high alert. We're ready to attack or to run. Have you ever noticed that when you feel stress of some kind, your breathing also becomes tight? You might even hold your breath. Let me give you an example of how you can harness your sacred breath in situations like these. A few years ago, I had a team member who came into my office. Carol was upset, she was frustrated, she was angry about something that had happened. She was talking a mile a minute and not taking enough of a breath for me to try to calm her down and find out what was going on. It was kind of like that. Each time I tried to say something, Carol cut me off and resumed her high intensity monologue. She just couldn't make room for me to try to be helpful. Then I remember having read that you can shut down your reactive limbic system and turn back on your thinking brain when you take a few deep breaths. I got Carol to pause long enough to do that. Here's what she did. Looked like this. Well, when she'd taken 2 very constricted breaths, I asked her to watch me demonstrate. I took a few deep, gentle breaths, fully inhaling and exhaling completely. And then I asked her to do the same. It was like a miracle occurred. Carol visibly relaxed, her speech slowed down, and her tone of voice returned to normal. From there, we were able to have a productive conversation about what had upset her and talk through options she had for dealing with it. Carol decided what she was going to do next, and she left my office calm and well prepared. Well, fast forward 10 days or so, and Carol was back in my office just as upset as she was that other time. It was another high-spirited, angry monologue. When she finally took a breath, I asked her to remember how helpful it was last time to have taken a few gentle, deep breaths. And so she did. And just like that previous time, we were able to have a productive conversation. She came up with a plan and she went on to take care of business. By golly, that really works, I said in my inside voice. Well, some time had passed and Carol came to my office once again, upset about something. There were, frankly, more than a few unnecessarily stressful things about where we worked. As she sat down, Carol started in as she had both times previously. And then she caught herself, laughed, and said, "Hang on, I need to breathe." Isn't it amazing that our breath is not just to keep us alive and not just to do things like play a sport or do physical work or to provide oxygen necessary for new life to form inside a woman's womb? Breath, spirit, actually helps us to think, to focus, to use our intellect well. In Genesis, when it says that God breathed life into Adam, the word that's used is the same as the word for spirit. And as I reflected on what happened in this situation at work, I began to really appreciate how much more breath and spirit are one and the same. Well, this episode wasn't just stress, it was calamity. The leg pictured on the left is mine in the emergency room on the night of May 20th, 2021. At about 9:30 that night, I took my dog down the stairs to go out for his last walk. I thought I'd gotten to the bottom step. Unfortunately, no, there was one more. I'll spare you the details, but I knew immediately that it was a very big, very bad break. My neighbors heard me call for help and stayed with me until the EMS team got there. And my niece made the 15-minute trip from her house to mine in record time. I had just moved to a second-story apartment, literally having slept there for just 6 nights before this thing I call calamity happened. I learned I would be 30 days non-weight bearing and I would have several weeks of recovery to do after that before I could even consider going home to my second floor apartment. Alone in my hospital room, I was unable to even begin to think of a plan for how to take care of myself. I could feel myself spin out emotionally, only I could neither flee or fight, and I definitely couldn't think straight. Then I remembered the lessons Carol and I had learned together. I took several slow, deep breaths and felt myself calming down. I was able to remind myself that while I needed to figure this out, what I needed more at 3 o'clock in the morning was to give my body healing rest. I practiced this throughout the rest of my hospitalization. One of the other things I'll share was the impact of singing a favorite hymn. Each time I felt the worry and the panic take over, or try to, I took those slow, deep, calming breaths and I sang these words.
Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou dost do.
And I sang those words last night over and over again as I was going to sleep, thinking about today, wanting to calm myself and have the confidence to speak with you. Well, I'm delighted to tell you that calamity passed. My niece, my brother, my sister-in-law, my 2 sisters, it took a village, and I pulled together a plan that allowed me to recuperate and heal and get my strength back and eventually move into a home that had no stairs. I truly believe that when I took those slow, deep, calming breaths, I breathed in the breath of God. So we're going to go into another breakout session. I want you to think about a time when you have used your breath to your advantage in a stressful situation, or when when it might have helped if you had taken a few slow, deep breaths to help you get to a focused, grounded place. I'm going to ask you to share not so much the details of the situation, but what song or prayer or in the moment practice comes to mind. Please make sure that everyone in your group who wants to can share. And Christina, if you would go ahead and move folks into the breakout room. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Again, thinking about the opportunity you folks had to have conversation, I do believe God would be delighted. It's about time, don't you think, that we talk about Jesus? You know, that Jesus, a man who loved children, a man who loved to eat a good meal with friends and strangers, and a man who grieved the death of his friend Lazarus, fully human, that Jesus the Christ. This simple verse, Jesus wept, and this image remind us that just as we can meditate on God breathing life into us and on the gifts of our breaths, considering our last breath is a vital part of the Christian life. As I mentioned earlier today, you seem to find yourself in the wrong place at the right time. For example, when my sister Jane's health was becoming more and more difficult due to cancer, I was able to rearrange things enough to live with her and to care for her the last 4 weeks of her life. Despite having had cancer, a type with a typically poor prognosis, for 4.5 years, Jane had had a very difficult time entertaining any conversation about her worsening condition or that she would likely die. She said up front to her doctors and to several of us in the family that she did not want to talk about her prognosis, and she gave few openings along the way to ever discuss it. One thing she confided in me was her fear of the possibility that all the things she had said she believed in over the years weren't really true. I had no idea what to do or to say other than to stay with her until the end. As difficult as it was for my sister and how hard it was for us to witness and walk with her as she struggled, it was a sacred time. Jane isn't the only person of faith I've known for whom contemplating their mortality has been extraordinarily difficult. I worked with a fellow named Bill. Bill's sister had been a hospice nurse for many years. He told me that he could not even imagine how anyone could possibly want to do the work she was doing, to be so near death. He just didn't want to think about death. I was surprised at the time, but now I understand that Bill is not that much different from many for whom their Christian faith is at the center of their lives. A few months after my sister died, I visited my mother, who also had cancer. It turned out that my visit unexpectedly coincided with the last 10 days that Mother would live. Perhaps because she lived a lot longer than Jane, perhaps because she had seen her children grow into capable adults and parents, and perhaps because Jane's daughter was still in college, and surely for some reasons I have no insight to, Mother and death had a more gentle relationship. One of the things that Mother did that Jane resisted was to welcome people to share their goodbyes. And one day she asked me very calmly the question Jane so struggled with. Do you think this is the end? Well, why do I share these stories with you? Each of these experiences, and more than a few others, have been wise teachers. My colleague Bill, my sister Jane, my mother Helen. So many other people have contributed in their own ways to my curiosity about death and to my willingness to not turn away from its reality, to consider it, to learn from it, and to live an abundant life, even knowing that death will inevitably come. I've come to believe that we're missing out. We're missing out on something so sacred that we can't imagine ignoring it or shoving it in a corner to think about only when we're forced. That if we bring ourselves to make the effort to plan for and to anticipate death like we do birth, we could appreciate that both our first breath and our last, each is as sacred as the other. And as God is in that first spirit breath, God is ready to receive our last. If only we would treat it that way before we come nose to nose and toe to toe with our own inevitable death. Which is actually what John Wesley and Jeremy Taylor did. They urged us. Here's a description of John Wesley's deathbed scene. As he lay dying, his friends gathered around him. Wesley grasped their hands and said repeatedly, "Farewell, farewell." At the end, he said, "The best of all, God is with us." Lifted his arms and raised his feeble voice again, repeating the words, "The best of all is, God is with us." Jeremy Taylor says, when you lie down with a short prayer, commit yourself into the hands of your Creator. And when you've done so, trust Him with yourself, as you must do when you're dying. Both these men made a big deal out of the idea of a good death. If you're not familiar with Jeremy Taylor, he was a 19th century churchman who wrote a lot about death and dying. They both made a big deal out of the idea of a good death, that a good death was one in which the dying person professed to their last breath to the people gathered near that they fully trusted in God, in Jesus as their salvation, and that it was the responsibility of the Christian to do this as an example to others, even to the point where scholars are pretty well convinced that the deathbed stories they told and preached about were quite possibly idealized descriptions, meant as much to encourage more than they were an accurate reflection of the events of any particular person's death. A good death was to be strived for. Of course, Wesley was just as concerned that the way a person lived was an essential lead up to a good death. The same for Jeremy Taylor. I wonder if Americans and our medicalization of death is the first time in human history where we don't just naturally understand death to be inevitable and normal, part of the way our bodies were designed. Both Wesley's ideal and the hospice movement, focusing on comfort care and quality of life for a person whose time is limited, shed light on some of the things we can do to aid in our appreciation for death as a sacred time, a sacred experience. The contemporary hospice movement is intended for people to experience a good death in both the physical and social realms, with minimal pain, surrounded by familiar things and the people we love, as well as the spiritual realm. But not every situation can meet Wesley's ideal or fit the ideal hospice model of a good death in one's own bed, surrounded by loved ones, and in Wesley's case, alert and verbal to the end. Lazarus and Tabitha, who is raised from the dead by Peter, and several other notable characters in the scriptures were resurrected. Well, why aren't their ultimate deaths mentioned? You ever thought about that? Because the writers of the scriptures and the people of the time could not have imagined that these folks wouldn't eventually die completely. Their bodies would die. And can you seriously envision them joining us this Zoom call today as living, breathing people? Well, of course not. Death is natural, normal, and to be as expected as birth. And not every situation can meet Wesley's ideal. Death sometimes comes like a thief in the night, may be caused by despair and suicide, by an accident, or by a vicious act intended to rob someone of their very life's breath. All the more important we take on contemplating our mortality. It's a task of our humanity and a task of our Christian faith. And if we put that off for when we're ready, how will you know when that is? What if, when the time comes, you and your body are so physically and mentally occupied with just getting through the day that you no longer have the energy or the benefit of time to think deeply about your mortality and do the necessary spiritual and practical work of dying? Well, in our Wesleyan tradition, we've looked through 4 lenses today. I encourage you to consider these and other scriptures that shed light on what is sacred in our birth, in our breath, and in our death. We looked briefly, excuse me. We looked briefly at tradition, how Wesley and Taylor suggest Christians approach death preparation. Reason through considering our body's physiological reliance on breath, and experience. I've had the chance to share some of my own, and you've had a chance to share some in your breakout sessions. I hope over the next days and weeks and months that you reflect on your birth story, breathtaking experiences of your own, or insights you can gain thinking about where you have glimpsed breath's sacred moments. If you're one who just can't get to this vital work, I've got one last story to encourage you. This one's about taxes. Seriously, what's a good laity session without a little discussion of death and taxes? For decades, my husband was responsible for 5 different tax returns: ours, his mother's, one for his mother's business affairs, and for a family partnership. He did a great job of it over the years, but these tasks that he could do so easily and so quickly became quite an emotional burden for him. There was a lot of family drama involved in all of the returns except ours. Tired of the tasks each year, he procrastinated longer and longer, finally finishing by the second extension deadline in October. Nearly every day from mid-March to October, he would say, "I really need to work on taxes today." It was constantly on his to-do list, and it wore on him. This thing hanging over him, the way procrastination seems to do to me too when I put things off. It just felt overbearing, and the not getting the taxes done meant we were just missing out on the freedom and pleasure that comes from crossing something important off the to-do list. So one year we made a little game out of it. I proposed some incentives for meeting various timeframes for getting the returns done. And that year, he got 3 of them done by the April 15th deadline, and the other 2 were done by the end of May. And for David, actually for both of us, the year he got the returns done so early meant that the rest of the year was so much more pleasant. That sense of relief to have gotten the thing that David had procrastinated about so long, that had burdened him so much, helped our world feel a whole lot different. I was amazed at how much better both of us felt for the rest of the year. Well, besides the only 2 inevitable things in life are death and taxes, what's this episode got to do with contemplating our mortality? One of my favorite things in my ministry is to lead 5 Wishes workshops, giving talks on funeral planning rights and options and other end-of-life related subjects. Most of the people who attend are typically about 60 years old or older, and nearly everyone has said that they have just kept putting off things like completing their advance directive for healthcare, establishing their healthcare power of attorney, setting up a will, and pulling the documents together that their family members would need when they die. But they've screwed up their courage to think about difficult subjects and come to my sessions. Afterward, I get emails and notes from people who say, "I just got this done and it feels great." They faced up to some of the practical matters of their mortality, and now that looming task is off their list, and they have opportunities to enjoy life without that hanging over their heads. And I'm nearly certain that if John Wesley was our contemporary, he would be all in that Christians have a responsibility for doing this kind of work. He was a very practical man. Getting this done can also serve as an entree to contemplating other matters related to our mortality. As we wrap up, let's look at Jesus' final, very human prayers. Have we thought when we're afraid of pain or of the dying process or whatever happens after we die, by considering that Jesus understood these things completely, he was fully human, and that they were excruciating for him too. If contemplating your mortality is agonizing, for some of us, our death almost surely will be, physically or spiritually. You might find yourself with the same prayer my sister Jane shared with me. What if everything I believe to be true isn't? It seems that your prayer and hers might sound very much like Jesus' own desperate prayer. My God, why have you forsaken me? But Jesus' life and his death was one of hope. Jesus died with a prayer on his lips that gives me great hope that I can do the work to prepare one day, tomorrow, or a long time from now, to return my breath to the one who created me. Father, he said, into thy hands I commit my spirit. On March 23rd, 2020, my beloved husband died peacefully and unexpectedly in his sleep. I don't know whether I was still asleep beside David when he died, or if he passed between the time I got up and the time I went in to wake him. I spent a lot of time thinking about that, wondering whether David was even aware of what was happening to him. I've pondered the circumstances and thought a lot about the scriptures I've shared today. And as I still grieve his absence, I am comforted by my understanding that surely God was present with him, and that with David's last breath, God lovingly and tenderly received David's spirit. It was a sacred time, a holy moment just between the two of them. So what could it mean to how I approach each and every breath if I consider that when I die, regardless of the circumstance, I will return the gift of my breath to God, and that God will receive it tenderly and lovingly. And I would dare to suggest that God will receive it with more than a little excitement as God welcomes me into a relationship beyond anything I could possibly imagine. Father, into your hands I will commit my spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Martha, for that very informative talk. Thank you, laity members of the Desert Southwest Conference, for attending this session. Please join me in prayer. God, creator of all, you made us as human beings with a beginning and an end. Thank you for teaching us to make the end as beautiful as the beginning. Thank you, Lord, for all the people in this Zoom meeting. Bless those of us who have been able to attend. Thank you for the laity who fill positions necessary to run the business of our conference. We ask your grace when we fall short, and your blessing as we strive to continue on our road to perfection. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.